Welcome back to the Garden Hutch. Today we discuss week 3 of growing your own summer garden plants from seed. Let's get going. Well, by the beginning of week 3, many of your seeds should have started sprouting. Now, the ones who haven't, don't worry about those. I'm sure they will over time, especially things like peppers or your ground cherries. They can be really finicky, especially if you have fluctuations from hot to cold. Last year when we started our pepper seeds, we had one batch of our peppers that didn't come up for 6 weeks, and they were still fine to go in the garden, and we got quite a few bell peppers out of them. So now let's move on to our plants here for week 3. The first thing I'd like to address are the term leggy plants. Forgive me for doing that. It's just sort of a catch-all term for plants that have grown too quickly and they can't support themselves. Now, there's quite a bit of difference between plants that are just quick to grow and a leggy plant. So before we went too far, I wanted to make sure we distinguish between those two things. A leggy plant will be identified because it will not be able to hold itself up, right? So the steps we're going to take to help our leggy plants, we don't want to do those to healthy plants. So if you happen to have any plants that are falling over, can't hold themselves up, the easiest thing to do is going to be to fill up a container all the way to the top. What you want to do is you want to make a hole all the way to the bottom of that container, and you want to plant the leggy plant, until just about an inch of the stem is showing. Let me use these cosmos because they're nice and tall as an example here. So let's just say, for example, that these were like too tall and they were falling over and they couldn't hold themselves up. What I would do is I would fill one of these up, I would make a hole in the center of it, and I would plant it to right about there. You want to make sure that where they're, the first leaves that come up, right about an inch underneath those is where you're going to want to plant those. And I know that we try not to put soil around the stem because it's bad for the plant, but trust me when I say this works. If we end up having one over the next couple weeks, I'll take it out and show you how it kind of recuperates itself whenever you do that. Obviously, we don't want to plant the soil all the way up on the stem like that unless it's absolutely necessary. Now, with how to fix it, let's just talk real fast about how to prevent it because it's really simple. The easiest way to prevent it is to make sure that your plants are being exposed the majority of the daylight to direct sun. So if you have them on a windowsill for the early mornings and the evening, that's perfectly fine. But during the middle of the day, if your plants are starting to stretch a little bit, just take them out, put them in a spot where they'll get 6 to 8 hours of sun, and in 1 to 2 days, you're going to have healthy seedlings. The second topic I wanted to address during week 3 was thinning our plants out. Now, for our peppers and tomatoes, I generally only use one seed because almost all of them germinate, so I feel kind of wasteful whenever I do that. And I'd rather have a little bit of our potting mix that goes to waste as opposed to a whole seed that could develop into a plant. But that's not the case whenever it comes to other things like our pollinators, our kale, chard, that sort of thing. So again, I'm going to use these cosmos that we have sitting over here as an example. Now, whenever I go to decide which plants to thin, let's use these two here in the front. The easiest way to decide is I like to go by the actual girth of the stem itself. The height really is irrelevant to me at this point because by the time we go to start planting, most of these plants are going to be about the same size anyway. But if you look at these two here, the tall plant also happens to be a little bit bigger around. So when I go through to thin the plants, the number one thing that you need to remember is do not pull your seedlings out. What can end up happening is you can disturb the roots, and you can see from the bottom of these, the root systems are already starting to establish themselves. So the last thing we want to do is just pull this out and create a bunch of ruckus underneath the soil. So what I like to do is just take my thumbnail, go to the bottom of the ground, and pinch the plant off, just like so. The third and final topic that I wanted to discuss today is the weather. Now, this time of year, no matter where you live at in the United States, the weather is going to be variable. Some days are going to be warm and nice. Some days are going to be windy and cold. We're also going to get precipitation on different levels depending on where you're at. The reason this is relevant for us with our seedlings is if you have a greenhouse like what we have, you're going to need to pay attention to how much sun you're getting, and inversely how many days are cloudy. The reason for this is, like we discussed last week with the damping disease, you want to make sure that your greenhouse is well ventilated. You want to try not to let it get above 90 degrees for too long. That can kind of cause some adverse reactions on the seedlings. So, if you need to open a window or a door or something during the daytime, it's important to do so whenever your seedlings are this size. It's also important to make sure that you notice how much sun your greenhouse is getting in relation to when you need to water. So again, last week we talked about how important it is to make sure that we have a regimented watering schedule so that the tops of the soil can go ahead and dry off and that sort of thing. So paying attention to how much sun your greenhouse is getting is incredibly important. Now, if you're taking your seedlings out every day into a sunny area, everything we just talked about is also important. How much direct sun it's getting versus the clouds to make sure that our water and things the soil and how much moisture is in there is correct. But one additional thing that you need to worry about if you're carrying your plants out daily is the wind. Now here in zone 7B, it can be beautiful outside, but the winds can get up to 35, 40 miles an hour like it's nothing. In fact, today, I believe the wind gusts are going to be over 50 miles an hour. So if I were putting my plants outside, I would want to make sure that I was paying attention to the wind. Now, having lived in a windy area for quite some time, I can tell you that the majority of the time, especially in the spring, is going to be in the early morning and in the late evening. That's whenever, the sun coming up, sun going down. That's when we're going to be experiencing the majority of our wind. But that doesn't mean it's the only times, right? It can happen anytime. But the majority of the time, if you allow the sun to come up and kind of stabilize your environment, you can put your plants out safely. What I would do is just make sure that I had a simple weather app on my phone that gave me updates on how windy it was going to be. And many of them you can kind of set parameters for alarms. So on mine, I have the parameters set up to where if it's going to be over 30 miles an hour on the wind gust, I want to know just so I can be prepared in case anything gets blown around the yard. If your plants are sitting out in a sunny spot, you're going to want to know if it gets over 30 miles an hour as well, because you don't want your plants getting knocked over or the stems broken during this delicate stage of their development. As always, we appreciate all you folks who made it here till the end. Until next time, I hope that everybody takes care of themselves. Peace.